All right, I hope we're gone live.
Give it 2 seconds there. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay. Ah, crap. Looks like it is broadcasting my test from earlier. How annoying.
Delete.
I can't.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody. That was just me testing the stream this afternoon, but apparently YouTube just put it out first before the rest of it. I didn't know they were going to do that. Sorry.
Sorcha, welcome to a Candle Tales podcast, a live stream of the post-show chat for the Battle of Ventry. The 4-part episode. Warning, there will be spoilers in this chat, so if you haven't actually listened to the 4-part episode that we put together, I recommend listening to those first before listening to this. But if you're live, hello and welcome. If you're listening to back on this, hello and welcome. Thanks for listening in. We are very happy to be talking about the Battle of Ventry. As always, we want to just give a quick shout out to our Patreon supporters who've helped put this together, and they went to patreon.com/candletales to throw us a few bob, and it helped us put this whole thing together. Sound bunch of lads. Now, we're going to be talking about this, and Sorcha, you're going to be keeping an eye on the comments or questions as they're coming in.
Yes, hello, Jasper.
Great, because I'm going to be trying to feel this. We've loads to go through, and there's so many pieces of this puzzle to pick apart. I want to start basically straight into it, because the Battle of Ventry, if you have listened to it, it was immense. There was a lot to it. It was the first big saga that we got from the Fianna perspective. We've looked at the Ulster cycle epics, and we got into in as much detail as we've gotten into Ulster cycle epics like the Táin. But we took the inspiration initially from, luckily, Ciara Jameson. Shout out to her. She gave me a present of the book by Egon O'Marthaig and Donald Rick, and it was a bilingual book. We read that, we loved the story, and we wanted to recreate and retell it. Isn't that right?
Essentially, yeah. It's a gorgeous book, by the way. Anyone who is enjoyed this myth, I highly recommend you pick up a copy, because it's all proceeds go to protecting the coastline. I can't remember exactly what the charity was. I meant to look it up this afternoon. Didn't. But it's beautiful. It's a really beautiful book. It's the illustrations are extraordinary, and you do have parallel text in English and Irish. So even if you have a little bit of Irish, or you're curious about it, or you want to get a little bit better at it, you get that nice little you can see how the sentences are translated, and the little turns of phrase, as Gaeilge. So it's an absolutely gorgeous book that they put together. And we started with that, and we each kind of read through it a couple of times. And then, because the initial plan, when this initially was given to you, Aaron, our initial plan was to make this a live show.
Yes.
This was this was given, or we got this before, coronavirus and the lockdown and the apocalypse, the slowly unfolding apocalypse that we're still in.
And where we were going to do it was down in Phelan and Bealtaine, which is on the Dingle Peninsula. So we were really looking forward to going down there. And luckily that beautiful festival even was able to give a pittance payment to every one of the artists that were supposed to perform there, and one of the many festivals that this summer didn't get to see, unfortunately. And as we saw no live events this summer, we were in lockdown. We thought, right, we have a chance to deep dive into this myth and tell it like we haven't told before, and on a podcast. And so
and that was the different thing that we were kind of trying to figure out. Okay, how can we do something that feels spectacular and epic in the podcast format? Because I know my favorite podcasts are one where you feel like, someone's talking into your ear, and it feels very kind of immediate and close, and these post-show chats being in a similar vein, where it's you and me talking to each other and talking to you guys. as you're listening and as you're writing in. So it's like I like the ones where I feel like I'm the third person in the conversation.
Absolutely. And we got some
So
lovely feedback from people as it was going. But
what my point being that like that's a very intimate style of podcast. And this big Battle of Ventry epic was changing the vibe completely into something like more like one of our big live shows, because we already know that live. Like we know how to do a storytelling for 5 people or 10 people versus a storytelling for 300 people. And it's different. So it was kind of an attempt to translate the cozy vibe of this podcast into a bigger feeling spectacle, if you like. Or at least that was how I saw it anyway.
Certainly. Well, it was also a chance to give Oisín, our producer, a chance to really bring it into a different sound as well. Soundscape would use Foley, be more subtle with the music and kind of orchestrate it in his own way. And I'm sure he'll have a lot to talk about and tell us how he's developed that at a later date when we get talking about how he puts music together and how he's developed that. Because this was we were making up as we went along.
And we have I've been having a little bit of a fight with technology, so it's been late going up, but we have some of our rehearsal recordings are up on Patreon, hopefully at this point. They should have been up about a month ago, but I had a fight with technology. But yeah, like, you know, if people are kind of curious about how we developed it and how we actually brought it to fruition, you can see, and you'll soon be able to read transcripts of some of the phone calls between myself and Aron, where we're just hammering out details of like how we actually got there to where this is, which I think was a kind of it was an interesting process. I mean, it's one that we've done before, except much more over the phone and over Zoom than we're used to.
Yeah, it was interesting to not to be able to do it in person and not to have musicians there to play along with us and to come up with the music organically. So it was a different beast, and it is a very different beast now after finishing it. But I guess the first point I want to talk about is how we streamlined the story, the narrative, from taking from a book and something that you can get a lot of detail and a lot of glossary of every character, and the detail and the illustrations of the book, Cion Fiantrá that we mentioned, are beautiful, and that you get much more time with it. And of course, we did a 4-part episode, but it's still, you have to clip along. Each episode is on average about half an hour. So
a lot,
you know, and we had to cut out loads. So we had to kind of streamline it. And one of the biggest ways we did that, will you mention Con Critter?
Yeah, well, like I still think that the pivotal rehearsal that we had, and it was the one that wrecked everybody's head, and it was the one that took hours, was the one where I went through it and I listed out all the names of every single character that appears in the book. And then we went through and we read through it all with a kind of a rule in mind of like everybody who turned, because as is the case with a lot of, you know, mythic texts, you don't get introduced to the characters before they just show up to do stuff. So it can be really hard to track who everybody is. So we kind of had a rule of like, all right, the only people that we're going to mention at the end of this podcast or at the end of this show are people that we've introduced at the top of the show. So we had to do this whole process of going through all of the characters and figuring out, okay, this guy needs to be introduced here. This person needs to be introduced up here. This person who doesn't come into it until like the end of episode 3 needs to be established way up here at the top of it. And through that process, one of the things that we did was we amalgamated 2 characters, Con Critter and Glas McDrown, who both appear in episode 1. And I think it was your idea, actually, Aron, to keep things like grounded in their perspective all the way through it, because we kind of needed the, you know, I often think with an epic story like this, you need a hobbit. You need somebody ground level that you can see it through, so that it's not just so big and crazy that it's overwhelming and kind of detached.
Actually, a hobbit is a great idea or metaphor because I guess you wanted someone on the ground level, like you said, but somebody who is a bit of a rookie, and you literally just follow. And I guess one of the, you know, critiques of when I read and listened to the story again and again was the fact that you get a character mentioned and they disappear, or you get this big thing said, like Khan Critter is the rookie that is introduced at the start. He sees the invasion come in and he's given this gift of a healing well, and then you don't basically hear from him again.
You never hear
And
from him again.
I just kept on becoming more and more fascinated by what it would be like to sit and watch a war unfold that you're taking part in, and every night getting healed to go back into the fight, and the psychological trauma and horror of that, because you're not getting to die, you're seeing everyone else die. And he was gifted the chance of having one other friend to come into the healing pool, and of course we just joined a dot and made that Glass McDrowan.
Because Glass McDrowan, like, you know, things that are in the original text, like Glass and Con do realize they're cousins, and that is what makes Glass switch sides again. But like the ending of the episode was where we amalgamated the characters, because at the end of the episode, spoilers, spoilers for a 1,000-year-old myth. At the end of the episode, of course, somebody grabs up the King of the World's crown and passes it to his son, and then passes it to the warrior of Aramuk. And then somebody else drags Dara Dunn out to the ship to escape with him. And then a warrior that we've never met before is the one who goes out and drowns him in the waves. And we thought how much more interesting this will be if we keep those roles as Glass and Con, and keep those as our main characters, because then they actually have a whole arc. They're not just introduced and then dropped.
Yeah, and it was more interesting, like give the human perspective, to give a human story of them beginning in it, going through it, and ending. Because oftentimes the big myths can be this big, huge thing. It's the kings and the queens of fighting, and all these guys getting killed. You don't really get to hear that story, and often it's in the middle, but you don't get to really get a human story. It's kind of cinematic. So we tried to do that anyway. So maybe that worked.
That was the intent. And I think it, you know, it is a thing with mythology that it can feel removed, like it's all happening to people who are bigger, like larger than life, and therefore there can be a little bit of an emotional disconnect sometimes there isn't, but I think with a big epic like this, especially with so many characters in it, it was kind of important. We felt it was important to have hobbits is important.
Hobbits. The other big thing that we made a change with was, well, not a change, but we refocused the lens a little bit. And you know, the hall where Dara Dunn introduces his armies is one of the great scenes, and you get all of these armies, and the cat heads and the dog heads are mentioned, and then they come up as, like, you know, one of the other armies that come onto the beach and they fight with the Tuatha Dé Danann, and it's kind of like, oh, good, the Tuatha Dé Danann came in. So, you know, and previously we talked about another story where cathead monsters come against the Fianna, and it's this vicious thing, that it's a description of these monsters coming out that have ferocity like animals, but yet a mental capacity of humans. And so we built that up to be the big dragon that would be released, and that became the big dramatic kind of turn for us as well, because we needed something to hinge the dramatic tension. And I think we both felt there was something not kind of there. It was all a bit samey
there. Yeah, and that's the thing that we were really trying to avoid in all of this, was, from a dramatic point of view, getting into something that felt repetitious. Because it kind of can start to feel repetitious. Because again, these kinds of stories, I think of this probably a little bit like the Tone. Maria just wrote in to say we did some great strange voices. Thank you. Cat heads and dog heads being two of the big ones. But yeah,
they were a lot of fun.
We really didn't want it to become repetitious, because I think when these stories are usually, or would have been told, in my mind anyway, you wouldn't sit down and tell the Battle of Ventry all in one evening. It would probably be something you tell over multiple nights or multiple days. And like, in that case, it doesn't become repetitious to have battle every time you tell the story, because it's an episode. You know, you think of episodic television as it used to be before we had streaming, where everything is like one 17-hour film. You know, you had an episode. There's little episodes where like every week there's a new monster and people go out and fight it, and then that's like the end, and then there's a new one the next week. And yeah, if you watch 10 of them in a row, it's crazy repetitious. But if you're watching it over a period of time, it isn't. So I think that was something as well, where we're taking something that's essentially episodic and trying to make it into one whole arc.
Yeah.
And that meant finding the variation and finding the differences.
Yeah, and I think like one of the big things that we focused on was to make that big dramatic, making them as big, as bad, as fierce as in order to then basically put it in the back pocket of Dara Dunn, the King of the World, because he was, and you kind of had a lot of psychological, I don't know, I think you had this whole Machiavellian relationship with this character that you built up in his head. Yeah. That you kind of went off and like, if you were the king of the world and you had this monstrous army, what would it be like? How kind of brilliant, but also how he seemed to, I don't know, sacrifice a part of himself that was a young warrior in having these monsters that could destroy everything. You went off the deep end on that one. Can you tell me a bit about it?
I sure did. I had a lot of fun. There were several things with this that I feel like I had a lot of fun, like writing some speeches and going real deep into some character stuff that I don't usually get to do in retellings, because I'm trying to stay like faithful to the source material or whatever else. But like
the speeches are one of my favorite parts, but we'll get to them at the end though. Okay, we're gonna get to them at the end, all right?
But like the Dara Dunn character was part of it, because we had decided at the beginning, and I mean you did a similar thing with Fionn, which I'll ask you about in a second. Like we had done a thing at the beginning where we kind of decided an easy enough way to split the narration was for me to mostly tell the King of the World stuff and you to mostly tell the Fiona stuff. And actually that we stuck with that pretty consistently. We kind of thought at the beginning we probably wouldn't, it would fall apart at some point. But yeah, that resulted in me getting really into the idea of this character Dara Dunn, who is the King of the World, who decides to conquer Ireland kind of out of a fit of pique. Like he doesn't need to, except that it's annoying that somebody somewhere doesn't consider him the King of the World, and who then gets stuck on this beach, on this island that should have folded long ago, that is just not folding. And I think I kind of like, because I started thinking about all kinds of things, like the sort of the sunk cost fallacy, where you're like, well, I put so much into this, I can't possibly stop now. And then also the whole thing of like absolute power corrupts, and like the idea of a doomsday weapon, I think, was what was in my mind when I was thinking of the cat heads and the dog heads, because they're not, you know, they are these inhuman creatures that would just destroy everything, that have no kind of, you know, I'm thinking of the kind of warfare of the Táin, where it's single combat and it's very much to do with a kind of an honor code. These are not warriors that respect anything to do with that. These are like, you know, weapons of mass destruction in a way that can be unleashed. And I think it is true of anyone. And you think of modern warfare and modern weaponry and modern, you know, chemical agents. There is a cost to unleashing this stuff, you know. And I do think it's a on some level it's a spiritual cost, because whoever you are and whoever you're deploying it against, there's a toll that has to take on a person. So I got really into the idea of like, if a king like that had a magical army that could defeat anybody, what does that do to you as a person? How does that change you, and how does that like wear on you? So I then got to make him go like, you know, a little bit crazy and obsessive, sitting there watching sand.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites, actually.
I like that sequence. But again,
and I guess
with Fionn McCool, because you were kind of, because we were really kind of looking at the idea of Fionn McCool as well, and him as a strategist. And you
Yeah.
had watched, was it the Michael Jordan?
Michael Jordan. Yeah, I just watched the Michael Jordan documentary, and like talk about a guy who's brilliant and leads from the foot, leads by example, pushes his team to do the best they can possibly do, doesn't take any fucking excuses, and just goes right at it. And doesn't, and no, none of his teammates described him as a nice guy, but they all did better because of him. And he developed his own like leadership, and that was just kind of me kind of going, oh, light bulb moment for Fionn McCool. Oh,
Yeah.
he doesn't have friends in the Fianna. He's a foster father to a lot of them, and he's a father figure, but he leads honestly, and he makes the tough decisions, but he also leads by example, and he pushes for their best. And that was kind of what I really enjoyed about writing the kind of the first kind of level, of introductions of how they ran and how strong he was and how he never gave up and always pushed himself. And there are little introductions to them, to the other characters that would land in there. And I guess the loyalty that he was shown, that he won and he deserved as a result of his leadership and his fairness and his authority and what his word was. No, everyone knew that the honor code of the Fianna was strength of liberty of heart and actions, because there was no way one would ever break that. And when he led by such example, everyone followed suit. And it was interesting to get into the mindset, the head of a character like that, who is such a burden, and the burden of brilliance, and as well, which is kind of the nature of this island that we live on, and the politics that has always governed it being fractured and not very streamlined, is that he's not friends with the king. The High King of Ireland doesn't like him, and so we set up at the very start that because the High King doesn't like him, the armies of Ireland don't go to face the armies of the King of the world.
Which is a really kind of interesting thing in terms of like, the idea of, there's some dispute as to whether there was ever a High King of Tara. I think there's no actual evidence that there was, even though it's in our mythology. And certainly if there was, the High King didn't control the rest of the country. If there was such a role, it was not a person who held dominion over everyone else. It was a much, it was a different kind of a cohesion being held there. But like Ireland never really had that sort of cohesion, and like we kind of still don't. People will often talk about their county before their country, or their town before their county. We're still very tribal.
Yeah, it's a tribal mindset, and I think it's like it's that kind of underdeveloped, maybe slightly less, I guess, a global mindset, or a more higher. What's the phrase I'm looking for?
I don't know. You'll find it. Keep looking.
A higher level of consciousness is where, like, you break down the borders and you see everyone as equals, and that's kind of what the Fianna kind of represent. It's like there are no borders in the Fianna. We are men and women of the land, and we're defending what's right and just, opposed to, and that's the ideology of the Fianna, opposed to,
and that's the ideal
and a tribalhood.
Yeah, that's the ideal of the Fianna as we kind of see them in this story, is that they are the people who are transcending the tribal divides. They are the people who are, because it's part of the joining of the Fianna was to give up your family,
and your possessions, and your lodging and whatever you have.
Like if you think about ancient Ireland and the Brehon law and the clan system, your family was your identity. It was who you were, way beyond possessions. Like it was your status, it was your identity, it was everything. And like if you committed a crime, it was your family who had to pay the fine for it. And if you were harmed, it was your family who would come and get justice for you. So like the clan system in Ireland was so strong. That's what the society was built on. And the Fianna, and like, a Fianna was a thing. There were lots of little Fiannas. the Fianna of mythology was like the Fianna of all Ireland. And it was a kind of an escape valve for people who didn't fit in. It was a place for people to go and kind of have a slightly different way of living that was outside of this clan system. So you had this kind of outlaw culture that was like running parallel, and then Fionn and the Fianna being like the example of the highest form of that, what that could be, which
Yes.
was this hugely like expansive, generous, welcoming, transcendent of political divisions and all those kind of good things. Now I'm sure there were plenty that were lots of bad things that were just some fucking thugs running amok and stealing your shit.
But
You know,
that's history versus mythology, I think. You know,
and I think yeah, like the ideal of the Fianna rather than the reality of the Fianna.
And that's why it's so interesting to tell these stories and place real gravity and reality into this ideal, is because you want to make it as human and as realistic as possible, while still understanding that this is an ideal and a perfection or level of perfect leadership that is possibly and has never been actually demonstrated.
Yeah, but if we can make it feel real, we can make it feel achievable.
Exactly, yeah.
And as human beings, we are, I think, so constructed by the stories that we hear and the stories that we live by that, like, I think it's really, really important to actually have impossible to attain examples of leadership and fellowship and just being good people, because it makes us kind of go, oh yeah, actually, maybe we could be like that, you know?
Speaking of leadership, so we've talked about Fionn and Dara Dunn and the obvious differences. Are there similarities between the two that you found?
This is what I think is very interesting, because we've talked a little bit about this before. And if you think back on some of the stories we did just like kind of in the run up to Ventry, like say the Lad of the Skins, Dara Dunn is a bit of a snake. He's well able to kind of like, you know, the thing that he does to the Sons of Garav in I can't remember which episode it was, but like the way he sets them up to fail. Episode 2. The way he kind of sets them up to fail and destroy themselves. Like, it's interesting because I think Fionn is in some ways there's a little bit of a similarity there, because Fionn McCool is also can be quite indirect in the way that he manages things. Like if you think back on the Lad of the Skins, for example, he has, and we talked about that in the post-show chat as well, like he has this servant that he doesn't quite trust. So he sends him on a quest that if he was a normal person would have ended up destroying him. But I think that the difference between them is very stark, because Fionn gives people the opportunity. Fionn holds the possibility that this person is gonna do the thing and is gonna actually come back a hero. Dara Dunn absolutely sets people up to fail, and fail hard and fail publicly. And he's also quite Machiavellian in the way that he does it, because it's kind of like, if you win, I win, and if you lose, I win. You know, like if you look at the Dollar Dorfa Sons of Garav whole sequence, which goes from like episode 2 to the start of episode 3, he has this warrior who has like 8 brothers who are all great warriors who he's a little bit wary of. And what does he do? He sends them out without the best one, so they all get slaughtered by the Fianna. And then he sends out the last one as a champion to avenge his brothers. And he's delighted, because like whatever the outcome, he wins, because Dollar Dorfa didn't attack him. So like he's clear. Either your man is going to get himself killed on the beach, or he's going to kill the Fianna, and it's win-win.
Yeah, and you know, he's removing a threat, and also I guess what Fionn would do in that situation, or seem to have done in that situation, is unfortunately have to put people out, but they pick straws to face Dollar Dorfa. He's like, oh shit, this is going to be 100 people dead tomorrow. Yeah. Okay, draw lots.
Yeah.
You know, like contrast.
Rather than go, okay, you, and you, I don't like you. You go out first.
And he puts his grandson in there. He puts his son in there. Like everybody is of equal kind of standing in drawing the lots there. So he doesn't
And
sacrifice.
like with the character of Fionn McCool being what it is, like he probably is drawing the lots himself because he doesn't
probably draw the lots himself.
There's plenty of times when Oisin or Oscar is like, "What? Get out of this! This is not a place for you." And Fionn is like, "No. If everyone else is doing it, I'm doing it."
Yeah, and this is one of the curious times where Fionn leads from has to be governing from the back. And again, it was interesting because they go, "Oh, he doesn't like this, does he? You know, he doesn't. He wants to be up there. He wants to grab the ball like MJ and shoot the hoop, but he has to be at the back marshalling and giving the orders because everyone will listen to him, and he's got the bird's eye. And so perhaps he's that bit older and that bit more mature and that bit past his prime, that he's aware that this is his best place. And so as the smartest position to put himself in, he puts himself where he can actually deal the most damage.
He's strategist enough to know that he needs to be in that position, but he's kind of warrior enough to hate it. And I think that's also kind of an interesting thing with like Dara Dunn and Fionn. Like when the two finally do take to the field, it feels a little bit different.
Yeah,
you know, Dara Dunn is like, well, I guess I have to, and Fionn is like, and there's a pent up release of frustration. I think there is really for both of them. There's this like huge amount of tension that has built up where they're just have been sitting on their hands for a year, and they finally split some heads open.
And I love the fact, again, like it's a total trope in the world. He can't be killed by any weapon made by man. And of course, luckily, Fionn McCool was gifted weapons from the Tuatha Dé Danann and has magic fairy, lightning, poison, sword and spear. It's like, of course he does.
Yeah, it's very, again, you can see where Tolkien got a lot of his stuff.
Oh man, can't you? It's so Lord of the Ringsy, like
no man can kill me, you know. Yeah, like it's as you say, it's a kind of a trope. It is that thing of like the person who feels themselves to be invincible, which I think was also kind of an interesting one in terms of characterizing Dara Dunn. Here's someone who genuinely believes that he cannot be killed, that he is invincible. And again, I don't think that would have a good effect on you as a person.
Not as a person, but because of their different leadership styles, they have two very different ways of having a vast, in one case, or a very loyal and quite small, but still big army. Like, so the contrast in their armies is huge as well. You have mercenaries, essentially, and loyal, hugely well-trained, deadly bunch of lads.
Well, I think it's as well, it's kind of like this direct thing. Like you've got, because Dara Dunn is the king of lots of other kings. So he's not actually directly commanding a lot of the army. He's commanding the kings who command the rest of it. So it's more diffuse, it's more spread out. It's very centralized. Like he's still the one who's calling all of the shots. But like that move he does where they roll into Ventry Bay and he's like, whose bit of land did we decide this was when we were back in a war room 100 miles away? You? Okay, you go get us food. Like he's not considering the welfare of all of these troops, because as far as he's concerned, they're not his troops. He's like the worst boss in the world, where he's like, well, you're managing that branch, so you deal with your staff. It's nothing to do with me. You know what I mean? Like that kind of person who's like, well, I am too busy and important for your petty shit, so you better just like find your own food, and also supply the entire army, because that's suddenly your job now, even though I didn't tell you that when we were back in, say, Spain, where you got food, where we stopped, where we were.
Yeah.
Presumably.
That was a really nasty trick there by Dara Dunn, right? There was like,
but I think it's one of those funny things, because I think it's one of those things where it's like, he's not even being deliberately malicious at that point. That's just how he runs things. He's not even trying to be a dick. He's not even singling out the King of Spain as like, it's not even a fuck you. It's just a like, well, I didn't think of this, so now it's your problem. You fix it.
And when the Fianna are called, when they're needed, at the very start, Fionn gets a message that, you know, the King of the World is coming, and he sends messengers to go look around every potential landing spot, and all of the Fianna, all 7 factions of them, they gather and they get ready and they prepare for a battle. Unquestioning. And
Yeah.
they're ready to fight, they're ready to die, they're ready to put their lives on the line for the sake of protecting the idea of Ireland, the idea of this land that is bountiful and abundant and giving and beautiful, and all of the things that Ireland represents. To all of them, they're willing to put their life on the line for, because Fionn has led them so well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I do think it is one of the funnier, in a black comedy sense, things that happens in the Battle of Ventry. And this was also some of the bits that we cut out for the sake of streamlining it a little bit, is how long it takes for the Fianna to get the message.
Oh man.
There's a succession of people who come after Concritter. Concritter is the first one. Because he falls asleep and then goes like, right, I have to redeem myself by attacking these people and possibly dying, instead of telling the Fianna that they're here.
Yeah.
But like the strong man, Taishtealach,
yeah.
fucking thing. And like, it is this hilarious thing that starts happening where people will show up in their 1s and 2s, go, oh, the army of the King of the World is here. Someone should tell Fionn McCool, but first I'm going to go kill someone. And get
I have to redden my hands. Yeah, I have to redden my hands because I can't run away. Couldn't turn my back. No, I have to go fight someone.
It's almost like Concritter set a precedent. And so who came afterwards was like, well, you've already killed a king, so I'm going to have to go kill a king now before I can do anything else. It's just the rules. It's just the etiquette of the situation demands it, which is hilarious. And yeah, so you have all these kind of episodes where people come in and have these like big one-on-one battles, and then just like finally someone goes, oh yeah, that entire army that we have, someone should go get them.
That brings me on to what I wanted to ask you about of the characters we see in the Fianna. So we get like very loosely introduced to kings, the king that plays the king in Norway, the king of Spain. We get no characterization in there. When we do get, like, over the saga, and I guess over this podcast, we've continued to increase our learning and our understanding of the characters that we meet. Oscar, this brash, you know, angry, brilliant warrior. Oisin, the kind of like, he's hilarious, but in utter Quail to McGrawn on the thin grey man who's so fast and sleek, but represent kind of almost archetypes in a way, do they? Like, they fulfill a big role.
Yeah, I mean, they're all kind of different kind of versions of the warrior archetype.
And yeah, but you've the warrior archetype, but you also have the bard, the poet in Fergus Fionn Vale, or Oisin often fulfills that role.
Oisin is a warrior poet, which means he's doing both. Fergus Fionn Vale, I think, is a great kind of example of where Dungeons and Dragons gets their inspiration from, because he's a bard who's like, his superpower is compliments. Like, when he tells somebody how great they are, they go, oh yeah, I am great, and then they just like win the battle, which is like really good fun to kind of play with as well. So like, yeah, it has they're all, and as you say, we've kind of had time to characterize some of the Fianna in previous podcasts and in previous bits of work, whereas everybody on Dara Dunn's side is new.
And that led us into a very fun level of giving the characters a voice for this particular podcast, because we never really got to do that. And as an actor and a performer and a glorified chai talker,
you do love doing
an aspect more than, well, I think there's like, doing a voice is one thing, and you know, for lots of kids shows you can just put on an accent and it's funny, you know, it's great and whatever. But I think we discussed this about having a subtle change in voice versus just any old accent, and rooting the character's voice in the body first. And we did lots of takes, and shout out to Ru O'Shea, who did a great voice for Concritter, and a couple of others, Neil Toner Oisin Ryan as well as Nelson Endebele, who all added voices as well as the two of us. And when we separated our narration voice into character voices, I threw you back like, no, that's you got to redo that one. We got to redo that one because I could hear when it's a character voice or when it's, or I was getting nitty gritty the same way Oisin would get nitty gritty about if the sound quality isn't right. I was getting nitty gritty.
Yeah, I remember one notable occasion where you said, "Do that again," and I said, "No, fuck off, I'm finished."
Yeah. It was working dialogue.
Yeah, exactly. We were always very mutually respectful.
But there was a lot of fun in finding voices for all these characters, and I to realize, okay, Oisin needs to sound, gruff and ready to fight. Conan Whale and Gull McMorna, the brothers, they seem to kind of cohabit this, like, kind of not quite arrogant, but very dismissive. They can't say a good word if a bad word can be said. Any slight will go to them. Any time you have something kind of poetic, it was Fergus Van Vale finding a way to describe the battle of the cat heads and the dog heads in that kind of other world way that he saw it. But it was a lot of fun to be able to put those in and work on them, I guess, is all I wanted to touch on. I did want to ask you about, before we get into the 3 speeches or the 4 speeches that we talked about and dissected, the big difference between the 2 greatest threats in this whole saga, which is the cat heads and the dog heads, as we talked about, and we build up the release of them throughout the first and second and third episode, and then the people who come to save them are the Tuatha Dé Danann. And the big contrast between them, this kind of mythic embodiment of what it is to be a spiritual being, and this vicious aspect of monstrous intelligence or something. What?
Like, it was quite fun because the cat heads and the dog heads, like, I did a lot more writing of stuff than I usually do in this podcast, because, like, in terms of actually writing the pieces, writing the speeches out as pieces of dialogue, as bits of writing, and like thinking of the cat heads and the dog heads. I voiced the cat head and Oisin voiced the dog head. Mind you, he did call me up and say, "Is this dog-headed warrior going to speak again? Because I'm sick at the moment and I can do it really hoarse and low right now, but I won't be able to do that again." Which is why that dog head sounds so inhuman. Yeah, that's why he's so growly. But like, it was kind of, I had a little think about cats and dogs and how they might fight, and I was like, well, a cat-headed warrior is going to sound like this, because that's how cats kill things, is like slowly and torturously, and they don't.
They're pretty psychotic.
Dogs kill things is like, it's all pack tactics and like fucking tearing things apart as they go down. So, and then when it came to the King of the Tuatha Dé Danann and Bov Darug, and like, looking at, because I think that was a really interesting thing, because we did it structurally in terms of like paralleling the quest to go and get the Tuatha Dé Danann to come and fight with the main narrative, because otherwise it felt like it went on for too long. And I think that worked really well structurally. But I thought it was really interesting to kind of dig in a little bit into like why the Tuatha Dé Danann were so reluctant, and then also why they ultimately joined the battle. And like, that's the thing that you see in the Book of Invasions, and that's the thing that you see over and over again in Irish mythology, is that there is no such thing as like a pure Irish person. Irish people are people who come from somewhere else, and they're Irish because they live here. And like, that is a consistent through line in all of Irish mythology. And so, you get it through the Book of Invasions. And so that was kind of, I thought that was a really interesting perspective for Bov Darug to be coming at it from, because also these are people who seem to live for a very long time. So this is someone who's seen invasions, and someone who's seen the different waves come to Ireland, and someone who's like, okay, but like, new people come all the time. so what? It's not taking anything away from us. And then
Yeah.
have it kind of, that was also one of the reasons why we had to kind of go into lean so hard on the dog heads and the cat heads as inhuman and monstrous and like pure destructive force, because it had to be a case of like, no, nobody is coming here to settle, nobody is coming here to live, people are coming here to destroy the place. This is an annihilation, this is not a conquest. Because it's that kind of thing of like, if new people come to an island, they will settle, they will eventually become as Irish as anybody who's lived here for generations.
Yeah.
How being a human works. But there is a difference in oh dear, there's something going on with the stream. Okay.
Oh dear. For how
well
long?
Listen, we'll keep talking because I'm recording this, and hopefully you're recording this, so if it stalls out for a second, it'll hopefully come back.
Apologies to anyone listening back on this as a podcast. We are trying to live stream these every week as a post show, and sometimes
we can just edit out the dead air, right? For like the podcast broadcast.
True. And are you still there? Oh, yeah, sorry, we glitched. Okay, we're good.
I'm not still there, but I'm back.
Did you glitch? I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi seems to have cut out completely. So I just went on to phone hotspot and phone data, and hopefully the YouTube is, I think, resuming now. Yeah. Listen.
Hello.
I'm recording.
Sorry about that, guys. Yeah. I can see it's swirling. All right.
Yes. Technical difficulties, Jasper has noticed.
Yeah, well, just type that in there.
I just did.
Oh. There you go. You did indeed. You did.
Things are reconnecting, and hopefully we'll be back up in a moment.
You did some great strange voices. You should tell Joy that he fit it into your presentation of the mythic. Yeah, we could do that.
Jasper said to blame it on the planets or the full moon, which I'm sure we can do. I don't know why it's their fault, but it's their fault. Still have a little bit of a scrolly wheel. Oh. I don't really know how to do about that.
Okay, I think we're back. I think we've
okay, cool. We were talking about Bo Darragh, and we were talking about the Tuatha Dé Danann and kind of characters that are and if the YouTube stream is not going to work, let's just finish the conversation and we'll put the audio only podcast out as soon as we're able to, because
sure.
Stop in the middle of a chat.
No, of course not. So yeah, I guess this was the difference between the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Catheads, and the first big speech that you kind of focused on writing, which was a beautiful speech. And it was one of those things that struck us when we tell the Battle of Invasions and when we go into what the kind of the Tuatha Dé are and how they managed to like step aside very gracefully and still remain Underhill in the 3x50 islands of the other world, yet remain kind of attached to Ireland, seem to kind of live here, belong here, and have a kind of a shadow and a watch over. And in the book, like it stops, it just goes like, all he says, Bob Darragh, is to the messenger is, "Oh, you're a good messenger." Once he kind of delivers that message of, you know, they need us, they're not going to stay. So we had to fill in a bit more of a block there, an explanation, a proper dissect what could have been and would have been said in that position, and explore it. And I think that was one of my first kind of favorite bits. Anyway, first favorite bits. as that Bov Darragh speech, and again making it some way eerie and ethereal. It ended up being a bit of a Lord of the Ring voice, but it was still fun to do. And I guess the book again shows the warriors of the Tuatha Danann fighting the catheads and dogheads, much like the rest of the battles are fought out and played out, and it describes the lineages of all the people who are. But we decided it would be kind of more interesting if that happened off screen. So
we decided to put them behind the mist because it felt like, again, it was to avoid that kind of sense of repetition, because it's a cool fight, but it's like cool fight among many. And we've talked about potentially kind of at some point we have some I guess almost outtake stories that we could record separately and put up as the little episodes of these different battles that do happen, which is a future of this problem.
But yeah, right after
that was a fun speech to write. But yeah, right after that,
chronologically in the narrative, we have Fionn facing the catheads and dogheads and trying to rile up the Fianna to fight and to live and survive. And they're all like, we're going to die, we're going to be destroyed, no one's going to remember, no one's going to be here to remember. The bards and the druids, they're all going to get ripped apart, there's not even going to be a survivor to tell this story. And then you came up with the Forgotten Heroes speech.
Yeah, that was nice. Well, like, I was thinking of it in terms of I was actually thinking of it very much in terms of what's going on in the States right now, and like the not just the Black Lives Matter movement, but the legacy of slavery and colonialism more broadly, because that's one of the huge traumas is the loss of the story and the loss of the history and the loss of your people. When someone is ripped out of their own home and not even left their name or their language, that's a lasting trauma, and that's a generational trauma. And I was kind of thinking about it in terms of like, also in terms of some of the work that's been done with her story, and like, recovering forgotten stories, particularly of women, but like, other marginalized people as well, because we sometimes think that we invent, standing up for your rights, or that we have invented, certain kind of movements for justice or insistence on the humanity of certain people, because we don't hear the stories in history of people who've done that before. But of course, there have always been people fighting for their own rights and for the recognition of their humanity. And so that's kind of what I wanted to think through in a mythic sense, was like, we don't hear the stories of all of the people who stood up and fought against, those who were trying to dehumanize them. We don't hear the stories because the people who killed them killed their stories as well. And that struck me as both incredibly sad and incredibly powerful, potentially. Like this idea that those actions, those struggles, those the stands that people take for justice, for humanity, for equality, that they don't actually go away, but that they're kind of become part of our, almost like our collective unconscious, or our dream of the world. And so that was where the Forgotten Hero thing came from. And it seemed like just a perfect opportunity to put it in the mouth of Fionn McCool, as someone who has the wisdom to understand that anyway, and to kind of say like, yeah, we can fight and die and be absolutely annihilated and be completely forgotten and never remembered ever, and it's still worth doing. And it kind of like that idea then of like, you're actually tapping into all of the people who've done that before, and all of the people who will do that in the future.
Yeah,
Good idea.
that's such a beautiful idea, because like no matter how much is written down and how much history is done, you can never really fully comprehend the amount of struggles that have ever gone on like that. Especially like, so I know I knew in kind of current affairs of Black Lives Matter and what's going on in America, but also what rang so true to me was the colonialism of Ireland, and how so many fights, there's so many rebellions that were failed, and we only know a fraction of them. And
Mm.
our story of why there's O'Hagertigs and our family name down in Cork is because we came from Donegal for the Battle of Kinsale in 1600s. Like, and that's
And
one of the
and
failed
like
battles.
anywhere that you go in the
Of
world, anywhere that you
oh
go in the
yeah,
world, you go to North America, you go to South America, there were indigenous uprisings, there were battles fought, there were slave rebellions, there were, like, any part of the world, in Africa, in Asia, in East Asia, like anywhere in the world that you go, this stuff has happened, where people have said, this is not right, I'm going to stand up to it, and they've been completely annihilated, and their names have been burned out of history, and nobody remembers them. So, like, it's something that definitely is part of our history in Ireland, but I think it's also part of the history of humanity.
absolutely, yeah.
That there are these forgotten heroes everywhere in the world, and like they're all of our ancestors,
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
they've paved the way. They've certainly
they
led.
have, and it's a really weird one, because it's kind of like, well, how can they have paved the way if we don't remember them? And it's like, yeah, but we do remember them. We remember them whenever we have that instinct of like, this isn't fucking right, and I'm not going to
Yeah,
stand for it.
yeah.
That is drawing on a resonance that has been built up for millennia by people going, no, this is not okay.
And
And
like, no matter what culture you're in, like I was down in Dingle this summer, and I heard the story of the guy. I was down in Kenmare, and had found, basically called the bay a river, so that he could, because rivers could be taxed and the fishing in the sea couldn't. And I was in a kayak with my girlfriend on a little kayak tour going around the islands, and I was so angry. I just, like, something came over me, like I wanted to. I would have fucking marched head into battle. I would have fucking just drummed up. I was alive with the anger, and like, it wasn't my anger. It was something that was
yeah,
steeped in the air. It was steeped in the land. I was on a fucking boat, and I could just
but
see the trauma and the hurt and the
yeah,
resilience of all of that history fucking in the ether. And it was something
it's
mystic,
in,
and it was something not
it's
fucking
in the land.
quite understanding.
But like,
It's
you
completely.
get that in the folklore of Ireland as well. You get that in the hungry grass. Like, there's patches of grass in Ireland where you step on them and you so overcome with weakness you have to lie down. And that is the memory of the famine that is held in the land. And so there is this thing of, like, the energies of these conflicts and these traumas and these pains are still, they're persistent, and they're around, and they're in our kind of collective memory.
And that's why you need these stories in some sort of way to tap into the collective. Even if you've no experience of that yourself, you need this story to have some form of cathartic release and connection to that feeling, because I think you can come through it. You can feel it. You can feel it brimming. It's why we watch movies about war. It's why we get so passionate and so tearful when that happens. And it's why we listen to these stories, and we need that message to be made as well. And why it's so powerful. And that was one of the most powerful bits, I thought. You wrote, I put my voice to, but I just thought it was um, a very nice bit of writing, as
Definitely
was.
me trying to pick up on something that is around at the moment, and something that's going on at the moment, and, like, I think to articulate that feeling for people
Sure,
who haven't experienced directly, to
sure.
articulate it.
Um, Something you articulated very interestingly, which is not often articulated from a female perspective. And I know you and my brother get into fantastic debates about femininity and the patriarchy, and
Toxic
what is the
masculinity.
patriarchy anyway, and toxic masculinity and time, which isn't a huge one and not a very popular one to be talking about. But Og Armuk is the greatest woman in the world. She's the greatest warrior in the world, potentially. And she gets gifted the crown of the king of the world because the prophecy said that the next king of the world will be a woman. And we know in Irish there is no word for queen. It's just a ban ri, a woman
Well,
king.
there is a
So
word
the
for
next
queen, but it
woman,
means woman king.
I mean, but yeah, sorry, that's it quite literally translates as woman king. That's what I read. There's no
Yeah.
shut up, Sorcha. Don't be a dick. So Ogarmuk is gifted this basic bit of power. Is gifted the king's crown, and she puts it on, and you have a bit of a tirade here, and you give an interesting perspective to a hate-filled woman who's given power.
I mean, this was me kind of trying to articulate the other side of, you know, these movements for justice, because, and I think there's a real fear that is inspired by, you know, people getting angry and shouting for justice. And I think I wanted to give voice to somebody who was everything that is feared, because, you know, this is a thing that can happen when power moves and changes. And you saw it in the French Revolution, you know, with the Reign of Terror, where when someone who has been oppressed or is a member of a group that has been oppressed for a really long time gets into power, sometimes the temptation is to go, all right, all you motherfuckers who did me wrong, you are up against the wall. Heads will fucking roll. And so I really wanted to give Og Armuk the kind of toxic femininity thing, as I was calling it. It's not really entirely that, but like just this idea of like, what would happen if you put someone in charge of the world who is from any kind of oppressed or marginalized group, who is living in that rage. And what would happen is exactly the same thing that's happening now, just flipped.
Just flipped, yeah.
And
there's no positive to that.
Nobody would be better off. Nothing would really change. Everything would go on as it has been before. It's just who's on top and who's on bottom would be different. And like thinking about, you know, the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and the kind of healing that needs to take place in there, in all of us, in rebalancing those kinds of energies. I really wanted to give a kind of a like, this is not the way.
yeah. Well, it was interesting because I think your discussion with the woman who does or started her story.
With Mel. Yeah.
Mel.
We had been talking about toxic femininity as kind of like, you know, if there's a toxic masculinity, there's a toxic femininity. And if there's an expansive and aware masculinity, there is also an expansive and aware femininity. And like, it's really important to recognize that like any of those energies can go bad. And actually the big insight that she was describing to me was the necessity of transmuting your rage, of actually allowing that emotion allowing the energy of that to lift you up rather than to get stuck in it. Because if you get stuck in the rage, you don't get anywhere. You just continue to shout and be angry and fight, and you'll always find somebody to fight with.
Well, I remember I was at a rally for the abortion appeal in Ireland a few years ago, and Repeal the 8th, and there was a woman speaking, and there was a few people kind of standing up in Dublin and speaking, and a guy stood up and a woman shouted, get down, no men here, doesn't concern you. And like, you know, it was a typical point of like, I think it does though.
I think it kind of does. Like,
I think if you exclude men from that conversation, you're just, who are you talking to then?
You're perpetuating the same structure, was kind of the point that I was trying to get at through Og Armuk, was like, here's a woman who's like, fantastic, I'm finally in charge. Right, men, you are now non-people. Because you did it to me, therefore I'm doing it to you. And it's that kind of cycle of violence thing of like, you know, the idea of justice as revenge, you know, justice is retribution. If you did something wrong to me, I'm going to do it wrong to you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do it worse to you because now I'm the one in charge. And I really wanted to kind of like articulate that, because I think there's a sort of I didn't want her to feel like a tragic character. I didn't want Ogaramuk's death to be, because there's a kind of a, you know, we often in the show that we have made of Diarmuid and Grania and of Éachdach, the daughter of Diarmuid and Grania, who's kind of the next successor of the Fianna, who's cut down tragically and too young. That feels like a tragedy, because that feels like here's someone who might have transmuted her rage and gone on to be actually the next leader of the Fianna. And I didn't want Ogaramuk to feel like Éachdach, because even though it's quite a similar thing of like, here's this like amazing female warrior who goes one-on-one with Fionn McCool and he barely gets out of it with his skin intact. So I thought it was kind of important to make her, not tragic, and to let her give voice to that kind of like vengeance-based mindset of like, well, when I'm in charge, the first thing I'm going to do is fuck up everybody who looked at me sideways, which is like,
well, importantly as well, we like from a narrative point of view, we have to, well, we want to let and the listener see and have more empathy with Fionn and the side of the Fianna, and so we were essentially making a villain out of this potential great woman leader. So there's that side to it as well. But
she's not wildly characterized. She doesn't get a huge amount of characterization in the text that we were going off. So exactly, it was a little bit of a blank space for us to project into, as a lot of this stuff is. And that's what I decided to fill it up with.
Yeah, no, it was, and then we had the final little bit from Fionn McCool, which was the chant. well, right after Fionn kills this lady, we have the crown of the king of the world gone into the ocean, and it's dropped, and we'll never see it again, or it's in the hands of, as you said, Manannán Mac Lir, and Fionn kind of delivers that last speech, and we did an awful lot of writing between all these sections, but I left those bits of speeches right up to you, because you can articulate all those things.
In fairness, it was like, Fionn makes a cool speech.
What does he say exactly? I'll say it, but what does he say?
I'll read it out, but tell me what he says.
I mean, we'll bounce the idea around, but you'll just nail it down a bit better.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed having the opportunity to do that kind of writing. It was great fun. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, again, it was kind of like, well, if Ogaramuk is the kind of the toxic side of that, of like somebody who's still very much within their rage, then who is the queen of the world, or who is the next king of the world? And I think that was kind of a moment for Fionn to be able to be like, all right, the next king of the world, this is the kind of person she's going to be. And that was kind of me just writing, this is who I think the queen of the world should be.
Is she in New Zealand?
And whenever she turns up.
New Zealand?
I think like that model of leadership. I think that model of leadership is exactly what the world needs. You know what I mean? Like, I don't. That lady is a queen. She's definitely a queen. But I think it's a really interesting one of like, you know, it's a different way of leading, isn't it? And it's a way of leading that we are seeing more and more of in the world, and that I think we need more and more of in the world.
Again, I like that idea of like having the divine feminine and the divine masculine, and not necessarily genderizing that, like the energy of care and nurture, as well as strength and resilience. Like, they're not necessarily genderized. They don't have to be genderized. They can actually be in either gender, but as long as they're the positive end of the spectrum.
Yeah, because it's a funny thing of like, you don't get the toxicity in both comes from the rejection of the other. you know, when you get like what Mel describes as toxic femininity is the real kind of passive aggressive, like cruelty that women can get into. And it comes from rejecting any kind of direct confrontation, which is, you know, associated with masculinity and with, you know, masculine, a more kind of masculine energy. And similarly, you know, when we get into really rejecting any kind of softness as weakness, you get into that kind of toxic masculinity. Because actually, Ogaramuk is much more in the masculine energy than she is in the feminine energy anyway. She's the kind of woman who gets to power by outmanning the men. You know, she's a Maggie Thatcher type, where she's like, I'll be an iron lady. Like, she's described as being iron. She's described as being as hard as iron. And it is that kind of thing of like, you know, men can be feminine, women can be masculine. She's a very masculine woman. And that's how she gets her power in a man's world, is by leaning right into the masculinity and cutting off any kind of softness in herself. So yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting to envision a king of the world who is able to transcend all of that. Can't remember what I wrote now, but I'm sure it was good.
Well, it was also just a nice way to leave the entire saga of death and war and destruction, and on a positive note of like, when this ideal is there, the world will be at a time when they can accept a woman that is nurturing and is caring, or that, and that's often what, like, one of the things I have about when people give out about a leader. I'm like, yeah, well, you know, the people in the democracy elected that person because maybe the people in this democracy are at a certain level of development that they haven't gone through yet to evolve into a more profound leader. You know, they may need this fucking awful leadership until they can, I don't know,
until they realize that actually they allowed this. Yeah.
So
something they allowed to happen and manifest it and get rid of it.
It was a nice way to leave that on a bit of a positive, that we are all continuously evolving. It is all continuously going light and dark and swirling and going in a gradual positive spiral, as I like to think of it. And I think the last thing we need to mention in this whole post-show podcast, because this is now coming to an end and we've gone over our hour, but we're well over our hour, right? But is the music which was developed.
Stopped streaming us half an hour ago, I think.
Oh dear.
Has been anyway, this.
Apologies, YouTubers, but we will try and sort that out. And if you are listening to us again, we want to just thank you very much for tuning in. Oisin Ryan was the editor and the creator of all the soundscapes, music, Foley, and some of the voices on the podcast. So not only a big bool of us to him, but this is our thing, and redeveloping, be playing with more sounds and stuff like that as well as we go. And this was kind of like a baptism of fire for Oisin in lots of ways of how to piece together this monstrous thing, and he managed to do a great job, in fairness to him. So we're going to be doing more slightly less elaborate podcasts, but more podcasts coming to you very soon.
We'll be kind of getting back to our regular, hopefully once a week podcast. That with this, and this is going to be our new time for the post-show chat. It'll be here on YouTube. It'll be 7:00 on a Sunday evening. That's going to be the rhythm for the
Black Irish time, and you can always listen in your own time. Hopefully the glitches on YouTube will be fixed. We'll sort that out. And if you have been listening and enjoying these podcasts, do reach out and let us know. We've had some great feedback, and thank you all so much for reaching out and telling us you listen to them. And it's been really heartwarming to hear some people abroad thank us and tell us that during lockdown, when they were a little bit feeling nostalgic for Ireland and Irish stories, they were listening to our podcast.
We're praise junkies. We like being praised. Just give us nice little virtual pats on the head and tell us we're great. And
thank you very much for sharing it with your friends. I'm off to post a few t-shirts to people who've ordered them. The t-shirt link will be going up on our website soon enough as well. So if you want to get a t-shirt with our logo on it, you can do so. That's enough of that kind of stuff. As always, if you want to go to patreon.com/Candlelit Tales to throw us a few quid, you can do. There'll be more extra content released up there. And is there anything else I forgot, Sorcha?
I don't think so. Keep an eye on all the social media stuff, because we'll be announcing some stuff soon. Because we have ideas, some of which are now plans and that are going to be put into action soon. We also have many ideas that are far away from being plans. So, keep an eye on all our social media, because we will be updating people on what we're up to and what we're at. And thanks a million for tuning in.
If you want to
bearing with us.
Thanks a million for tuning in, and Slán. All right.
See you.
You.